talked about this before, about the tree of life, the Sephirot. I think we went off on, well, you went off a little bit on that, and a little bit of a monologue, but this idea of the Sephirot, the tree of life, we talked about Ein Sof, we talked about Malchut, which is at the bottom, the grounding. I think you did a good job of demystifying that, but I think just to outline that there is an idea that God is infinite and unknowable, and there's this map of 10 interconnected spiritual energies that step down the unknowable, untappable, as it were. Well, this is basically, the Sephirot is the idea of a tap to step down the spiritual energy of God into this world, and they flow through these things called Sephirot, which are attributes like there's wisdom, understanding, I can't remember them all, loving kindness, Chesed, Gevurah, strength, and they represent the building blocks of, it's kind of a fractal picture of both the cosmos, the whole thing, the whole of creation, but also it's a little picture of in what goes on inside of our human soul and in our communities as well. God wants to make himself made known and demystify himself into something concrete and something that makes sense, something that's walking, talking, caring, loving.
And it's not just random. It comes from a book called Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation. It's translated, or book of creation. Really influential and foundational book. We, in my Hebrew class, went through Genesis 1, and using a key that is outlined in Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, it's absolutely fascinating, and it absolutely is rock solid when you are in the Hebrew with this. And it's incredible, like it's a hidden pattern that comes out of the words of the text of Genesis 1, that you can't make it up. I mean, it's amazing when you see it form. It's a pathway from Ein Sof, which is completely endless wave of God. Let's call it like a wave collapse diagram of endless possibility, into Malchut right at the bottom, where it becomes actually real life, lived life, something that God wanted to manifest, to make actually real. It's a paradox, to be honest. We say the spiritual world is actually more real than this world. It's definitely true, just as our minds and what we want to do in our heads is more real than sometimes what we create. But we create, we want to make something. I'm walking along humming a tune. That tune is more real in my head than the record that I release. It's never going to be what it is in my head, but it wants to become something, and that means I can share it. And I think that's all we're talking about when we map out the path of Ein Sof down to Malchut using the tree of life. Visual metaphor, I suppose. So, after saying that, we want to, after the psychology and the quantum metaphors, move over to the language of Jewish mysticism. So, in Kabbalistic thought, reality is often understood as layered, as we've alluded to there. There's an inner dimension of things, and there's this outer dimension of things, the outer form, the visible. Every community has an outer form, the meeting, the study, the words that people are saying, the room, the chairs, the coffee, the discussion itself. But then there's also the inner layer, and that's what people are carrying. That's the feeling that is not being said. That's the fears, the hopes, the underlying currents, the wounds, the resistances, the longings that sit underneath the visible conversation.
So the visible conversation is never the whole conversation, is it?
Exactly, and that's what I think I've found this really useful. The visible conversation is real, but it's not complete. And when we gather around something as deep as Torah, when we do spiritual conversations, real conversations with each other, the inner layer is activated, and the text begins to touch places within us that draw things up within us. It exposes stuff. It's sometimes quite radical, sometimes very painful, violent, and it's sometimes very gentle. But there's always this movement between what's hidden and what's revealed. And that brings me to a really strange and beautiful word as well. Chashmal, and it's actually the modern word for electricity.
Yeah, it's from Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 1, verse 4.
Do you want to read that for a sec?
Okay. I looked, and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning surrounded by brilliant light. I
love that. Sorry, just to say that God is often depicted in this kind of tornado-y type windstorm thing. You know, he stirs things up like a tornado, just turns things upside down often when he arrives.
Yeah, absolutely. The centre of the fire looks like glowing metal.
And stop there. So that word for glowing is the word Chashmal. In some Jewish mystical readings, Chashmal is understood as a combination, like you can break this word up, of two movements. Chash, meaning silence, and mal, which is connected with speech. It's derived from Aramaic. Memalelot, or Hebrew milel.
So it's a place between the unspoken and the spoken.
Yeah, and that's what I find so interesting, considering what we're talking about here. So it's like this membrane between the hidden world and the revealed world, between what is inwardly present but is still silent and what becomes finally articulated. It's a bit like wave function collapsed into a particle. So sometimes in a community, something is still in a hush stage, like the silent stage. It's not yet spoken, but it's not inactive. It's really alive underneath the surface. And that's why people may be feeling it. The room may be carrying it because it's like the atmosphere is being shaped by it on some level. Then at some point, something becomes mal, it becomes speech, it becomes concretized, heard, named. And it crosses that kind of membrane from hiddenness into revelation. It's revealed.
So the question is not just, is something true, but is it time for it to become speech?
That is such an important distinction, exactly. Because not everything hidden should immediately be spoken. And this is where we find that there is a wisdom to silence. There is a wisdom to keeping something in its hush state. But conversely, there is also danger in silence. So if something is hidden for too long, it begins to sort of distort the room, so to speak. So Chashmal gives us a way of thinking about that threshold. So what's meant to be held silently? We need to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, what is meant to be held silently is a really good question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose there's a readiness. When is the wisdom to bring what is silent into the spoken realm through that membrane? When is something ready to be spoken?
I suppose you can think about it like actually, I often say this when I talk to people. I think you do too. I've heard you say it. You've learnt it from me. The cake isn't baked yet. You know when you got the thought and it hasn't quite emerged enough for you to speak of it. And it's just like eating a cake that's not cooked. It looks good in the oven, but when you get it out, it just collapses into a gooey mess and isn't very pleasant to eat.
So what kind of container is needed for that speech to be safe?
Wow. That's really, wow.
We will go into it. We're going to talk about Wesley in a bit. Surprisingly, we're jumping around here, but it really does make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking actually that connects with Chesed and Gevurah as well, doesn't it?
It does.
Because in the language of the Sephirot, as we said, Chesed is loving kindness. It's this idea of expansion, generosity, this outward movement. I think you were looking at to the wave going out and out and out. There's no end to it.
Yeah, we talked about it being the energy of connection. Kind of wants to give, it wants to open, it wants to flow.
Yeah, and Gevurah is the opposite. It's like this restraint, the boundary, the limitation, the discipline. And it feels like cruelty, but it's not sometimes. And it's the strength that gives shape to love.
Yeah.
So Chesed with Esoidig, go with me on this. Chesed without Gevurah is going to flood the space, isn't it?
Exactly. And that is the key. That's the key. In community, Chesed is a beautiful thing. And I believe that was, we talked about the idea of the spiritual realms reimagined conversation we had. That's what the Garden of Eden was. It was the place where there was a bigger box, a bigger container for Chesed to be more expansive. And that's why we have to provide an atmosphere of safety for each other when we are returning back to that. We're not going to return to Eden as humanity until that environment of safety is there. God is wise enough to not let us step into that dangerous place of vulnerability.
Yeah.
We want Chesed in community. We want this kind of openness. We want this naked and unashamed Garden of Eden environment. Yeah, we want deep conversation. Yeah, we want people to feel loved. We want them to feel welcomed. We want them to be seen. We want them to be held. But if Chesed flows without some sort of boundary to it, without Gevurah, it can be absolutely overwhelming. And I went to see someone this afternoon who says, I do not do small groups. He's had some really bad experiences where it became just too weird for him. And that's exactly speaking into this. People may feel too exposed if there isn't a mature, wise boundary. Boundaries blur. And that's where you get into the realms of cult activity, I believe. And that's where actually I've experienced it, that communities have become very dangerous places. We can become too attached. We can become too responsible for each other, too emotionally entangled with each other.
So Gevurah protects the container.
Yeah.
Gevurah is what allows Chesed to remain healthy. It says we need a boundary to going deep. It kind of says this can be spoken, but perhaps not here, not now, not in this room, not with everyone present. And I think that's really vital for any community to be able to discern, especially a community that wants to go deeper.
Yeah, because depth without structure is dangerous, isn't it? But structure without depth, it becomes sterile.
Yeah, love that, exactly. Mature community really looks like both of these held in balance, doesn't it?
Yeah, and coming back to the idea, this is where mysticism really becomes practical. Chesed and Gevurah together is a wise balance. We need warmth, we need Chesed, which is on one side of the tree of life, and we need Gevurah, which is boundary, which is on the other side. We need openness, but we need restraint within that openness. And you could turn it around. With our restraint, we need a measure of openness. You can just turn it around. It's balance, isn't it? It's left and right.
You can have revelation, can't you? But you need to handle a certain amount of hiddenness within the reality of revelation. And actually, we need to be aware with each other how much we're speaking in balance to how much we're silent. And that's another aspect we need to think about within this, I think.
Yeah. I mean, this is all communal dynamics becoming very, very real when we talk about these things. Because the aim's not to drag every hidden thing into the light. I can overshare. And I know my sister, with her, she's just been diagnosed with ADHD. I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but that's one of the things about ADHD, is that you do overshare sometimes. But we don't want to drag every little hidden thing into the light. That would not be wisdom.
That would probably be chaos, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And the aim is to become discerning.
Yeah, and we need to ask the question, actually, fundamentally, what is moving beneath the surface? And once we are kind of starting to tune into that, we need to then discern what is still meant to be hidden within that, and what is really asking to be named, and what structure then, what Gevurah are we going to build? What structure do we need so that naming something is not going to damage, but actually bring freedom? Because, truth shall set you free, the truth, freedom, all that kind of dynamic. But I think container, structure, wisdom, and within that is like stepping down to the voltage of a power station into energy that's going to be useful. I think that's one way of putting it.
Yeah, and that's a Kabbalistic idea, isn't it? The stepping down of the energy of God into something that is transformative. And that's ultimately what group work is all about when it comes to the studies. And spiritual conversations ultimately really are about transforming your humanity into the image and likeness of God, which is ultimately what we spoke about in other conversations. Ultimately, the expression of God on earth is a community that works, a community that is flowing. And that's why the end of the Bible is all about that, with the city coming down out of heaven.
Yeah, wow. Good. It gives us a way of saying that community is layered. When we talk about Kabbalah in this mystical language, it gives us the picture that there's an outer world and an inner world. Thinking about the boundaries within Chesed, within love, in a community. When those things are held together wisely, the community becomes safer. It's okay to go a bit deeper then and become a bit more truthful once you've got the wisdom of the container.
Yeah, but when they're out of balance, the ripples, they can become a tidal wave that goes right through us. So either everything stays hidden and begins to distort the room, become destructive through its silence, or everything is exposed too quickly and the wave becomes destructive because there's no vessel that can hold it. It's quite a lot of discernment. It sounds really hard, but as we said at the beginning, I think this is a design that God has built into our psychology, into us. The work is to build a vessel that can hold depth, that can actually become the Garden of Eden again. But the operative word there is work.
Yeah, this is work. This is not an easy thing to do, to be honest, especially coming from this culture. We need to learn this on very deep levels. It's a difficult lesson.